It's really good to be here, and I had a great time at lunch. For those of you that were there, really enjoyed our time together. But it's lovely to see you all here and to be invited up. I wanted to tell you, before I get into my story, someone else's story. Money is my God. They weren't actually the words of that young man in 1992 as he settled into his new home with his new wife, but they may just as well have been. He was just a couple of years older than many of you here, actually. We'll call him Wayne for the time being. Wayne was raised on a council estate in Portsmouth, just north of Portsmouth, the eldest of 4 boys. His father was ill for much of his young childhood, and it meant that Wayne was the one that was supportive of his mother and his brothers. But the thing that this did to Wayne was it made him vow that when he was an adult, he would rid himself of the free school meals, of the jumble sale of clothes, of the charity shops. And by the age of 24, he was well on his way to doing that. A good home, a flash car, and a new wife. Wayne was chasing the god of money, earning quite a lot of money, actually, 4 times the average salary in what was the new IT industry. Over the next few years, a bigger house, a bigger car, and a family started coming along. But it was a family that Wayne would not spend much time with because his God demanded all of his time, often leaving home before 6 in the morning and not returning to early evening. Again, often working late into the night. But it was a lifestyle that he chose and a God he was willing to serve. And actually, those around Wayne looked at him and said just how well he was doing from where he came. Now earning easily 6 times the average salary in the UK, money was still his God. But of course, he wasn't alone in that. But one day he realised that the fulfilment he'd been chasing in money wasn't there. And he realised there must be more than this. Well, as you've probably guessed by now, or if you were there at lunchtime, I'm Wayne. Actually, I changed my name to Max in my early 20s. Perhaps as part of that journey out of what I saw as poverty, I wanted to not only climb out of that, to search for a better life, but also to rid myself of the name that I felt was still back there. Thankfully, my parents still call me Wayne. But actually, growing up on that council estate did impact me. It did impact me greatly. And I said my father was ill for much of my formative years. So really, even at that young age of 11, I wanted to search for a better life. There really must be more than this. I'll tell you a story of one of the times. Do you have these stories in your family, perhaps? The stories that you drag out each Christmas. You know, the ones that are about one of the people in the family. And you elaborate a little bit on them each year, don't you? And have a good laugh together. Well, this story doesn't need much elaboration, but it was one of those times when my dad was ill again, and this time also out of work. And he rose something like 5:30 and shook us boys out of our beds and said, let's go for a country walk. And we started walking across to the countryside about a mile away from where we lived. And before long, we started diverting off of our usual path, and we walked along the farmer's potato field. And then we walked along the farmer's cabbage field. And then his carrot field. And along the way, we selected the choicest carrots and cabbage and potatoes to take home with us. This is the sort of way that I was raised. And then this would happen quite often, and we would often bring home enough veg for the week for us. I'm not saying it was right, by the way, but it was what happened. And then one day we came home, and my father found my mother crying in the kitchen. And it'd been a particularly hard week where there wasn't much in the way of money around. And my mum hadn't managed to get... The roast was a big thing in our family. I don't know, Sunday roast was a big thing. And she hadn't managed to buy enough pork chops. It was often that she wouldn't buy enough pork chops for everyone, and she would go without. But this time, there wasn't even enough for, as she put it, the boys. My dad, being the man that he was, cut the end of the loaf of bread off, carved the pork chop out of the knobby or the crust, depending on where you come from, threw breadcrumbs all over it and some gravy and baked it, and then served it up to my younger brother with his roast. Les declared at the end of his meal, "That was the loveliest meat I've ever had." And of course, we don't let him forget that come Christmas. I'm sure we'll be saying it to him in a month's time again. And it's funny, isn't it? And it's great to have those. But those were the sort of stories that shaped who I was. Actually, I just wanted to get out of that cycle. And so in my late teens, as I was searching for something else, I met a dear friend, Adrian, who ended up being my best man at my wedding and is still a dear friend today. And as I'm searching for something else more than this life that I've got, I meet Adrian, who is funnier than I am, who is more intelligent than I am, who comes from a middle-class family, who encourage him. And Adrian is liked by everyone. You know how you look at people and you think, actually, if I could be like that, that would be fulfillment. I'd reach my goal. I mean, this society that we live in has almost made it an epidemic with celebs and stars and football. But for me, it was Adrian. He was a few years older than I was. And I thought, if I could be like him, liked by people the way that he's liked, then that would be me, sorted. And so Adrian was an atheist and still is, even though he's a dear friend of mine. And I thought, I could be an atheist. After all, God hadn't been much in my life at that point anyway, so that made no difference. He was the outdoors type. He loved caving and potholing and surfing, and I thought I could do that, and actually discovered I really could, and I loved that. And he had great people skills. He was loved by people. And I studied Adrian and learnt how to be like him. And then, he was a few years older than me, he went off to university. He went off to Bristol, sorry about that. But he went off to university. And I found that actually, despite all people's best intentions, they just have life to get on with. My mentor, my guide had disappeared. And it wasn't his fault, it's just life, isn't it? But over the next couple of years while he was away and as I grew older, I discovered that being liked by people also was not reaching the goal, wasn't fulfilling me. And so I thought, stuff it. If it's not that, I'm going to go back to my original goal. I'm going to earn as much as I can earn. I'm going to work my way out of this council estate. And so I did. I went back to college, studied again, as I said, what was a new industry at that time, really, IT and computers. Found I had a knack for it. Some people would call it a geek for it, but I had a knack for IT. And when I left college, I went and worked for different companies. And within 5 years, I'd worked for 5 different companies. I was good at what I did, but every year I wanted to reach a new level, to earn more money, and that meant moving on. And every year I thought, this will be the company that meets me, fulfills what I need to do. And so after 5 years, I found that I was there. And by this time, I was married. And so, if anything, my urgency to be fulfilled in life was greater, because now I wasn't just doing it for me, I was doing it for my beautiful wife and what I hoped would be my family. But the problem was these employers were just getting in the way. And so I went it alone, and it was a good time. I was a self-employed consultant, and as I said, I was earning 4 times and then 6 times more than the average wage. I was charging myself out at a ridiculous rate, but people were paying it. And I thought, this is it. But it wasn't. One day I held my newborn daughter in my arms. I can picture it now. I looked into her eyes and I thought, there is still more than this. There has to be more than this for her, for me, for my wife. Money really wasn't cutting it. By this time, I'd managed to be in an even bigger house. I managed to have a flasher car, as I said. But the truth was, I also had a negative bank balance, because if you look for money to fulfill your life, often you will buy ahead of what you can really buy. And if you spend more than you earn, it doesn't matter what you earn. It equals misery. So I'd leant my ladder against the wall of career. Thomas Merton is a Trappist monk, or was many years ago a Trappist monk, and he puts it like this. He says, people may spend their whole lives climbing the ladder of success, only to find once they reach the top, that ladder is leaning against the wrong wall. I'd leant my ladder against the wrong wall. There is nothing wrong with money. There is nothing wrong with success. But if you place who you are, your self-worth, on what you can achieve, then it quickly makes it wrong in your life. And as I stared into the eyes of my new daughter, I knew that I'd leant my ladder against the wrong wall. And actually that my search for fulfillment was still on. The truth is, this character, Jesus, had been trying to get hold of me for some time. There had been a number of people in my life at work who had been trying to explain it to me. But I wasn't interested in this Jesus. He wasn't the sort of guy that I cared about. I was searching for fulfillment. I wanted a leader that would take me to that place and my family. If I found a leader that would show me how to reach fulfillment, I would put the work in and chase them to the ends of the world for me and my family. But it wasn't this sandal-wearing, hippie, meek and mild Jesus that I knew about. And not only that, I'd seen those Christians coming out of church on a Sunday up the road. They looked miserable. They were judgmental, they were wimpy, they were boring, and they were just downright unattractive to me. Jesus was not the person I wanted to be like. The problem with my stance on Jesus was that it was full of conviction that had little evidence in it. The truth is, the people that told me Jesus was meek and mild and boring and wimpy weren't actually the type of people that I wanted to be like. They didn't have the fulfilled life that I wanted. And as I began to search and listen to and read books about people who had fulfillment in life, I found often there was a commonality of the fact that they followed this teacher, Jesus. And so I began to search into him. I don't articulate it very well because that's not my game really. But for some reason I was drawn to search for fulfillment in him. Later on, years later on actually, I read and heard from a guy called Lee Strobel. He was an award-winning journalist in America, and his story is a little similar to mine. He reaches the point of looking into Jesus. I'll read a little bit from one of his books. He says, "It wasn't a phone call from an informant that prompted me to re-examine the case for Christ. It was my wife, Leslie. She stunned me in the autumn of 1979 by announcing that she'd become a Christian. I rolled my eyes and braced for the worst, feeling the victim of a bait and switch. I'd married one Leslie, the fun Leslie, the carefree Leslie, the risk-taking Leslie. And now I feared she was going to turn into some sort of sexually repressed prude." Let's get real with this. "Who would trade my upwardly mobile lifestyle for all-night prayer vigils and volunteer work in grimy soup kitchens." I know how he felt. Instead, he says, "I was pleasantly surprised, even fascinated, by the fundamental changes in her character, her integrity and her personal confidence. Eventually, I wanted to get to the bottom of what was prompting these subtle but significant changes. So I launched an investigation. Setting aside my self-interest, I read books, interviewed experts, asked questions, analysed history, explored archaeology, studied literature, and for the first time, picked the Bible apart verse by verse." You've got to remember he was an investigative journalist, so that's his game, isn't it? "I plunged into the case with more vigour than with any story I'd ever pursued. I applied to training I've received at Yale, as well as my experience as a legal affairs editor of the Chicago Tribune. And over time, the evidence of world history, of science, philosophy, psychology, began to point to the unthinkable." He sums up what happened to me, really. You see, I'd been searching for my fulfillment in all the wrong places. But actually, as I looked around me, the people that had what I wanted had this common thing in their life. This teacher, Jesus. And so I searched. And what I found was that actually Jesus was not this meek and mild character that I'd been sold. Far from it. I don't know where that comes from, actually. Because if you read his biography and see what he did, it's the most challenging thing in the world. He comes to this earth. What I'm saying is true, he's God. So he comes to this earth as a man. He could come as God and say, "You will worship me." But he doesn't. He comes as the God-man, as you and I. And then he surrounds himself with men and women and says to them, "Come follow me. If you want a challenge in life, come follow me. If you want adventure, come follow me," he says. And then he winds up the authorities. He upsets the religious hierarchy. He upsets them so much that they nail him to a tree. They nail him to a tree. And 3 days later, he rises again, healing all of humankind. You see, that isn't meek and mild, is it? That's not wimpy. To me, see, that's the sort of God that if it's true, I'll follow that God. That's the adventure. That's what I want. That was the fulfillment I was looking for. Not some sort of tedious, safe God, but a God that would say, "Come follow me, and you will have an adventure." C.S. Lewis, again, says it way better than I can. You know, the Chronicles of Narnia, and particularly The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. We have C.S. Lewis sets up Aslan, the lion, as an image of Jesus Christ. And then Lucy, as she's gone through the wardrobe, is speaking to Mr. Beaver and says this. She asks him a question. "Is he a man?" asked Lucy. "Aslan a man?" said Mr. Beaver sternly. "Certainly not. I tell you, he's the king of the wood and the son of the great emperor beyond the sea. Don't you know who is the king of the beasts? Aslan is a lion. The lion. The great lion. Oh, says Susie. I thought he was a man. Is he quite safe? I should rather feel nervous about meeting a lion. That you will, dearie, and no mistake. Let the accent, don't you? That you will, dearie, and no mistake, says Mrs. Beaver. If there's anyone who can appear before Aslan without their knees knocking, they're either brave or just silly. Then he isn't safe, said Lucy. Safe, said Mr. Beaver. Don't you hear what Mrs. Beaver tells you? Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe. But he's good. He's the king, I tell you. And that's what I discovered. Jesus isn't safe, but he is good. He is the king, and he is my leader and my saviour, and worth following. And when I discovered that, my whole life got turned upside down. It changed completely. Because I discovered that Jesus Christ said, the thief that comes only to steal and kill and destroy. But I come that you may have life and have it abundantly. You see, Jesus says that this world and what it calls fulfillment is a thief and will come to kill and destroy. And my search for fulfillment had backed that up. That wasn't news to me. I knew that. Because actually, if we put that down as our purpose, then we've missed the purpose of our life, the point of our life, the life you guys are setting out on. Jesus says he comes to bring fulfillment, not just in eternity. If you've been told he's for eternity afterward, after you die, then you've been sold a lie. It starts now. The adventure starts now. And you see, I can honestly tell you, as I look around at God's people, at you, at those out there, that people are trying to fulfill their life through sex, through alcohol, through money, through career, through education, for whatever it is. And they're missing the point. Many of those things, excluding the obvious ones, there's nothing wrong with them, many of those things. But let's not base our life on them. They won't bring the fulfillment that you seek, and they didn't bring the fulfillment that I sought. But the moment I accepted Jesus into my life, my search was over, and my journey with him began. I have wonderful relationships with my children. I'm not sure that would have been the case were it not for Jesus. The truth, I think I would have sold them for my career. That's the difference that Jesus made to me. I've got a great relationship with my wife. We've just returned from Prague, where we were like honeymooners, having fun. It was very sickening, guys. It was 40-year-olds dancing down the street. You would have been very sad if it was your parents. We've had our troubles. I'm not sure we'd be together were it not for Jesus. That's the difference he's made to me. That's just some of the difference. But it doesn't mean that my life has been plain sailing for the last 20 years since I gave my life. No. I was a self-employed consultant. That wonderful market where I was earning so much money crashed. There were 2 separate times when I had no income. Try paying a mortgage when you've got no income, especially on the house the size that I'd managed to get hold of. That lovely woman I call my wife, she suffers from depression. Try trusting in God when the one that you love is hurting. It's not been plain sailing, but actually, when I didn't know what I could do for my wife, my leader and my saviour was there for me. When I couldn't pay my mortgage, it makes you think about where your self-worth is in providing for your family. And actually, the guy that paid my mortgage for me was another follower of Jesus. That will knock your pride a bit. That'll make you think about where your self-worth is, where your fulfillment is. Jesus never said, and I don't tell you now, that if you follow him, your life will be easy. Quite the reverse. He's not safe. He's challenging, and life with him is an adventure. But it's worth living. I know where I'm going now as I follow my leader and my saviour. You know, in this book there's a story about a guy called Saul. He was a bit of a go-getter. Bit of a religious type, actually. He's the sort of guy that would go to temple every day, multiple times a day. He knew the rules. He made up half the rules. He knew in his heart that at the end of his life he would stand in front of his God and be okay. In fact, he knew it so much that anyone that disagreed with him, he would sort out. There's a story in here about how he's standing by holding the coats of other people while they stone one of the followers of Jesus. He got his ladder leant up against the wrong wall. Saul had his ladder leant up against the wall of religiosity and of being pious, and in the same way that I had my ladder leant up against the wrong wall. But actually, you'd think, wouldn't you, that Saul would have lost it. Jesus wouldn't come for him, would he? Why would Jesus come for someone that persecuted his followers? That Jesus turns to Saul, the murderer, and says, "You've missed the point. You've leant your ladder up against the wrong wall, Saul. Come over here. Come over here with your ladder. The ladder leads to go up against this wall that says, love God, love other people. Come on the adventure with me," is what Jesus says to Saul. If Jesus can say that to Saul, he can say it to any of us, can't he? And he changes his name to Paul. And with the other apostles, Jesus spreads the news of the adventure through him. For me, there was a time when I searched for satisfaction and fulfillment in career and money. But I found what you guys already know. Satisfaction and fulfillment does not come from career and money. And then I was introduced to Jesus and decided to chase him instead. That's where I found my satisfaction. That's where my search ended and my journey began. I guess the question for you, when you go back to your digs tonight and you place your head on your pillow, is where is your search going to end up for you? Thanks for listening, guys.